The only sound in the room was silence, a silence that comes after a verdict, like time itself had forgotten to move. John Marlowe, a retired NYPD officer, heard every word as if he were underwater. Guilty. Death penalty. The lights in the courtroom seemed harsher than usual, like everything had been set up just to crush whoever stood at the center. He didn't cry. He didn't protest. He just slightly tilted his head, like someone who already knew, deep down, that this had been written long before his defense even began. Behind him, reporters and onlookers held their breath. In front, the judge capped his pen with a coldness that felt more like relief. And outside the courthouse, in the department's K9 unit, a German shepherd let out a long howl. Without understanding why, all of a sudden, her world had changed forever. 5 months earlier, John thought he had finally found peace. After 33 years on the streets of New York, he had allowed himself the luxury of waking up without an alarm, brewing his own coffee, and strolling around the block with Naira, the K9 partner he had personally trained during his final years on the force. He had picked her out as a puppy just before retirement, and since then, the two had been inseparable. Naira wasn't just part of his record, she was part of his home. She slept next to his recliner, barked when the microwave beeped, waited by the door whenever he took too long. That small apartment, surrounded by plants, might have looked dull to some, but to John it was paradise. He'd seen enough blood, chaos, and panic. He needed silence. And somehow, Naira seemed to understand that better than anyone. That night, though, something felt off. The wind was different. The doorbell rang unusually late, and the second buzz came with an aggressive urgency. When he opened the door, 2 armed men rushed in like they had done it 100 times. Naira lunged instantly, but a violent blow sent her crashing into the cabinet. John reacted on instinct. Years of training, pure defense mode. Within seconds, one of the men was unconscious, the other diving out the kitchen window. The police arrived minutes later, but by then, everything had already happened. The living room camera John had kept running for years was mysteriously offline. The intruder's body lay still on the floor. His partner had vanished without a trace, and despite the blood on his shirt and Naira's low growl still vibrating through the air, John only said 3 words to the officers who arrived. I just reacted. The interrogation started that very night. John didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't make a scene. He answered everything the same way he always had, directly, clearly, with the calm of someone who had spent decades on the edge without ever losing control. But things changed fast. The next day, the intruder's name hit the news with the headline, "Unarmed young man killed. His criminal record? Quietly left out." The missing footage, the vanished accomplice, and John's own history as a cop involved in previous shootings were all stitched together with precision by those who needed a villain. And in the end, a retired hero with sharp reflexes was all the prosecution needed to build their case. Naira was taken to a specialized shelter upstate. John wasn't allowed to say goodbye. In court, his composure was mistaken for arrogance. His clarity, labeled as calculated coldness. His years of service, reframed as a history of violence. The prosecutor stared him down like he was a ticking time bomb. And John, exhausted, stopped trying to convince anyone. Not because he didn't believe in his own innocence, but because he knew that, in that courtroom, truth wasn't an argument. The hardest part wasn't hearing the sentence. It was picturing Naira in a cold cell, surrounded by unfamiliar smells, waiting for a voice that wouldn't come. He remembered the look in her eyes when they were separated, the way she tried to resist, the way she growled, not out of aggression, but heartbreak. And now, her door was shutting. The metallic click of the latch sounded like a final period, but across the state, in a quiet gray shelter, something was changing. Naira, who hadn't moved in days, lifted her head for the first time when she heard a lock turn in the distance. Her eyes, once dull, were now tracking with focus. Her body, once curled up tight, began to shift with quiet purpose. When a trainee forgot to latch the kennel gate properly, she didn't hesitate. She pushed through the door, moved swiftly down the corridor, and disappeared into the night. It wasn't an escape. It was a mission. She knew where he was. If this story is already pulling at your heart, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what's coming next is even more powerful. Naira ran without looking back. There was no hesitation in her stride, no confusion in her path. Her body moved with certainty, even if the world around her said she was lost. But she wasn't. Every alleyway, every muffled siren in the distance, every overturned trash can or familiar iron gate brought back fragments of memory. The city was still asleep as she passed under the bridge where John used to sit during late nights off duty, just thinking. The city kept breathing, but for Naira, only one thing existed now: the detention center where he was. She didn't know the law, but she knew scent. She knew presence, and she knew absence. And his absence hurt more than any denied command. Her instincts were clear. He's there, waiting, and she had no intention of failing. As Naira drifted through the streets like a ghost, the shelter she'd left behind went into alert. It was still dark when a night shift employee noticed the empty kennel and triggered the alarm. They called the director. They called the trainers. They reviewed the footage. No sign of how she'd gotten out. No motion alerts. Naira had vanished like smoke, and what stunned them most was how clean it had been. No broken locks, no barking, no mess. It was as if she had simply chosen to leave. The director, a stern woman known for not getting attached to the dogs, stood in silence before the empty space. Someone muttered, "She didn't escape. She went to get him." And no one laughed, because deep down it felt way too true. Back in the high-security wing, John had stopped counting the days. In there, time lost its name. The guard's footsteps, the crackle of the intercom, the metallic scrape of meals sliding through the cell slot, all of it blurred into noise. He didn't dream anymore. He just waited for it to end. His biggest torment was not knowing what had happened to Naira. Had someone tried to adopt her? Was she still waiting for him? Or worse, had they labeled her unstable and put her down? John's mind, trained to withstand pressure, was no longer holding back the distorted images fear created. And no matter how hard he tried to stay composed over the past few nights, he had started talking to her in the dark, whispering apologies, even though he knew she couldn't hear. Or could she? Naira never stopped. She climbed hills, crossed wide avenues, dodged horns, and slipped out of strangers' hands. It was like she had an invisible map in her head. In her mind, the daily patrol route she'd walked with John was clearer than ever. The city's smell was memory. And as she approached the outer perimeter of the detention center, she slowed her pace. She observed. She sniffed. She hid behind a fence. It wasn't time yet. She needed to get in. Wait, pick the right moment. The tall walls didn't scare her. The security dogs on patrol didn't either. She had trained with them. She knew the drill. More than that, she knew the rhythm of the people inside. Her heart, silent until now, beat like a war drum. Hours later, a shelter worker made a quiet phone call to someone he knew at the Department of Corrections. "If anything weird happens with a dog over there, let me know," he said. His voice was steady, but his words said more than he did. The guy on the other end laughed, like it was some kind of joke. But that same night, guards began murmuring about a strange noise coming from the East Wing, a kind of breathing, something that didn't sound human. One inmate, speaking low, said he heard a growl outside the wall. "I'm telling you, it was an animal. But it wasn't angry. It was like protective." The guard wrote it down and followed protocol. But the report was never filed, because, for some reason, he also felt like whatever it was shouldn't be interrupted. By morning, the news of Naira's disappearance had started leaking. Small online outlets posted headlines like, "Retired K9 dog missing from shelter." But no one had put the pieces together yet. Not John, not the guards, not the wardens or trainers. But she was already inside. No one asked how. She passed through sensors without setting off alarms, past cells without drawing a bark. She was quiet, precise, focused, her body low to the ground, her eyes sharp, her tail still. Like during the missions, like the old days, like his life still depended on her. And somehow, it did. In one of the prison corridors, a new officer noticed something odd. The patrol dog stopped mid-route and stared into a shadowy corner. Then it backed away. The guard shone his flashlight. Nothing. No noise, no movement. But the dog trembled. And when a trained dog trembles, You listen. You take it seriously. And that man did. Quietly, he keyed in the access code and opened the side wing door. Unknowingly, he had just unlocked the only door Naira needed. When she passed by him, she didn't growl, didn't bark. She just looked him straight in the eyes like she was saying, "This is it, I've got it from here." Then she ran. Naira moved forward like instinct had taken the wheel. No hesitation, no exhaustion. She hadn't eaten in days, slept in fragments. And yet, she seemed stronger, sharper, more certain with every step she took. Her paws echoed across the concrete and steel structures as if they were part of the building itself. With every held breath, every shadow she crossed, her body adapted to the space around her like she was born for this. But this wasn't training. It was survival. She wasn't following a protocol. She was following what she felt. And what she felt was his scent, growing stronger, more alive, as if the world, despite trying to pull them apart, had left an invisible thread tying them together. In the most isolated wing of the prison, John felt lighter, though he couldn't explain why. He spent his days staring at the ceiling, arms folded behind his head, as if waiting for a sound that hadn't come yet. Sometimes he swore he could smell her. Other times, he heard breathing where there was no one else. He thought maybe he was going crazy. Maybe he was. Because unlike the other inmates, he didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't write letters. He just waited, as if something, a quiet presence, a fragile thread between two worlds, was telling him he wasn't as alone as he thought. Even the night shift guard mentioned it once. That guy. It's like he's waiting on a miracle, and he really believes it's coming. It was just after 2 a.m. when everything changed. First came the soft sound of claws on the floor. Then, a faint scratch on the metal grate. The guards didn't catch it. But inside his cell, John sat up, eyes half open, heart pounding. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't in his head. It was a sound he knew. It felt like a part of him, one that had been ripped away, was suddenly close again, just on the wrong side of the bars. His breathing shifted, and when he heard that first bark, his hands started to tremble. It was her. It had to be her. Naira never barked without purpose. She barked when it mattered, when someone was there, when it was time. On the other side of the door, Naira pressed herself against the cold metal, sniffing as deeply as she could through the thick structure. She didn't know exactly where he was, but she felt him. She felt every step he'd taken on this floor. She felt every unanswered day, every silence that echoed between them. She was there, and she barked, not loud, not frantic, but that very specific sound John had recognized since the beginning of their training. It was a signal, a cry from a soul that had found what it was looking for. And in that moment, John stood like the years had lifted off his back. He walked to the cell door, pressed his forehead to the metal, and closed his eyes. She had come, against everything, against everyone. She had found him. The alarms didn't go off. The sensors didn't register a breach. But a strange energy began to ripple through the wing. Guards whispering, inmates rising from their bunks. One of them mumbled, "There's something in here, but it's not just an animal." Minutes later, a supervisor caught movement on the security feed, four-legged, fast, weaving through the eastern corridors. The footage was grainy, glitching, almost like the system was failing in just the spots it couldn't afford to. But one frame, frozen on the screen, stole the breath from everyone who saw it. Naira, standing in front of cell 17B, eyes locked forward, as if she were saying, "I found him." The officers rushed down, but stopped short of turning the corner. They didn't know what they were walking into. A loose dog? An attack? A threat to the facility? But as they rounded the hallway, the scene they saw stopped them cold. John was on his knees, hands on the ground, and Naira had her snout pressed into the gap of the door. Neither moved, both completely still, connected. There was no violence, no fear, just something sacred in that moment. One guard lowered his weapon without realizing it. Another, a veteran who had served in Afghanistan, took off his cap and held it to his chest. And despite every protocol, no one dared to interfere. One of the supervisors called the prison director. His voice shook, like even he didn't know how to explain what was happening. "We've got a dog here. No idea how it got in, but it looks like it's here for someone." The director snapped back. "A dog? In a maximum security prison? You think this is funny? But the guard on the line said something that made the director fall completely silent. Sir, the inmate in 17B is smiling, and he hasn't smiled once since he got here. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was something else. A quiet unease. Something was happening that didn't fit into any report. As confusion took hold of the prison's internal systems, a staff member pulled out his phone and began to record the scene in secret. It wasn't allowed, but he knew this was bigger than him, bigger than the rules. It was proof of something that couldn't be ignored, a loyalty that defied fences, a bond that outlasted time, distance, and injustice. And in that moment, without anyone knowing yet, the video began to spread. First in private group chats, then among staff, soon across forums, until someone sent it to a journalist. The story would break within hours. But inside that prison, the shift had already begun, because at that point, no one could say for certain if that man still belonged behind bars, and even less, why a dog would risk everything to find him. The hours that followed felt like they belonged to a different time. The atmosphere inside the prison shifted, even though no one said a word. Guards who once walked past cell 17B without a glance now slowed down. Staff who had always avoided contact began sneaking glances, as if searching for signs of something they felt but didn't yet know how to name. John remained seated near the door, palm pressed to the metal, and Naira, still outside, unmoved, breathing calmly, refusing to step away. The two of them seemed to understand. Something had changed. That reunion wasn't just theirs. It was a thread being pulled from a knot-filled web, and that thread was starting to unravel. In the administrative wing, the secretly recorded video was beginning to cause discomfort. Tense faces watched the footage over and over. A few tried to dismiss it. It's just a dog. But no one really believed that. There was something in Naira's posture that spoke volumes. A silence in John that screamed. The prison director, a man known for his rigidity, finally stepped into the room and watched the video without saying a word. When it ended, he rewound it and watched again. Then he looked at the supervisors around him and asked, "Who is this man?" The answer came hesitantly. "John Marlowe, former lieutenant, convicted in the Brooklyn domestic incident case." The director scratched his chin. "And the dog?" One of the guards responded carefully. "She was his partner, K9 officer, removed the day he was arrested." The director nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed locked on the screen, as if still trying to understand what it all truly meant. Outside those walls, the video found new viewers with every passing minute. Someone had shared it with an independent journalist specializing in criminal justice. In less than an hour, it appeared in a published article titled, "The Dog That Crossed Prison Walls to Prove Her Partner's Innocence." The write-up was short but powerful. In just a few lines, it planted a question that spread like a crack through old plaster. If this dog came back for him, could he really be guilty? The comment section exploded. People shared stories about working dogs. Ex-officers wrote about the bond between partners, and John's family began receiving calls from reporters. Within 2 hours, the question wasn't just speculation, it was headline news. Inside the prison, John had no idea what was happening, but he could feel it. The energy had shifted. Guards now wore different expressions. The air in the corridor had changed. His once forgotten cell was now watched. But what struck him most was Naira. She hadn't left. She didn't bark, didn't whine. She was simply there. And it was that presence that kept him grounded, that stopped the free fall into despair. For reasons he didn't fully understand, she had come. She had made it through everything. And that alone would have been enough for him to die in peace. But deep down, a small part of him started to believe. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. That same afternoon, something unexpected happened. A newly appointed assistant prosecutor from the Oversight Division reached out to the court requesting access to John's case. He cited procedural inconsistencies based on newly disclosed media content and previously omitted records. What no one knew yet was that the video of Naira had reached his desk through an anonymous tip. Along with the footage came a transcript of a police officer's statement that had never been included in the official case file. A statement that mentioned a second intruder, the one who vanished without a trace, and more than that, an archived radio dispatch from the night of the incident, where John could clearly be heard requesting backup and describing two suspects, something the original prosecution had claimed was impossible to verify. And yet, there it was, clean, recorded, ignored. While things were heating up behind the scenes, the prison director made an unexpected call. He ordered Naira to be taken to a private room, but no one could get her to move. Every attempt failed. She backed away, let out a low growl, and looked at John like she needed his permission. Only when he gently whispered, "It's okay. Go," did she calmly walk into the hallway and enter the room with the guards. There, a state-appointed animal behavior specialist had been brought in to evaluate her. He observed for over an hour. Then he wrote just one line in his report. "This dog is not disoriented. She's on a mission." He attached the video with a caption that read, "Behavior guided by extreme bond, exceptional case." As more pieces of information surfaced, the media dug deeper into the trial. They uncovered glaring flaws, the lack of a full forensic report, the failure to submit footage from the street camera, the refusal to hear a neighbor who had witnessed suspicious activity. And most shocking of all, an old tape from the precinct, misfiled under a different name, revealed a conversation between two investigators, one of whom could be heard laughing and saying, "This one's easy. The guy's got a history of confrontations. We just let the narrative do the work." That was enough. The prosecution filed an urgent request to reopen the case. The execution was suspended, temporarily, but it was enough to make the world breathe a little differently. In cell 17B, John heard the key turn. It was late. He was already lying down, eyes half closed. The door creaked open. Two guards called his name. He stood up without a word, slipped on his shoes, straightened his collar, and followed them in silence. As he rounded the corner, he heard soft footsteps, not heavy ones. Footsteps he knew. When he turned right, there she was, Naira, lying down, waiting. Her tail thumped the floor twice. He stopped, didn't smile, just closed his eyes. Something deep inside him whispered that there was still one final truth left to be revealed, and she was the one who would bring that truth into the light. The courtroom was packed, not like the first time when most people showed up just to watch a fallen hero hit the ground. This time, it was different. Journalists, public defenders, civil rights groups, retired officers, and everyday folks filled the seats, many holding handmade signs. Some read, "Justice for John." Others simply had Naira's face printed beside the words, "She knew." The video of their reunion had become a symbol of something much bigger. Clips of it spread across social media with captions like, "When a dog shows more humanity than the system," and "Loyalty doesn't lie." But inside the room, John remained silent. Sitting next to his new attorney, he wore the same light blue shirt from the first hearing. He didn't look nervous, but his eyes never left the door. He was waiting for her. Naira entered a few minutes later, led by a special agent who had volunteered to accompany her. She walked with calm confidence, as if the courtroom, heavy as it was just another place where she needed to be. She stopped beside John, sat, rested her head gently on his leg, and stayed there. The judge, upon noticing, didn't interrupt. No one had the courage to, because somehow everyone in that room understood. This wasn't a performance. This was testimony, living proof of a bond that no report could ever explain. And for the first time in the entire process, the courtroom felt ready, really ready, to listen. The new prosecutor opened with a sentence that caught everyone off guard. "We're here to fix something that should never have happened." Then she presented one by one the evidence that had been ignored, recovered recordings, buried testimonies. She showed that the second intruder not only existed but was linked to a string of prior crimes, and that his disappearance had been conveniently swept under the rug. She revealed that John's home security system had been remotely disabled, and that the security company's logs confirmed it. She demonstrated how John's emergency call requesting backup was never submitted into evidence. And finally, she read an excerpt from the animal behavior specialist's report. The dog didn't hesitate. She came back. She found him. She stayed. If this man were guilty, she would have known. The judge listened quietly, then turned to John, then to Naira, then back to the prosecutor. He took a long breath. The entire courtroom held theirs. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than expected. In light of new evidence, proven procedural negligence, and what has become clear here today, all charges against Mr. John Marlowe are officially dismissed. This court recognizes your innocence. You are free. The burst of applause was restrained, but powerful. John didn't stand right away. He lowered his head and pressed his forehead gently against Neera's, and she, as if she understood every word, let out a long breath and closed her eyes. Outside, the crowd swarmed the courthouse steps, but John didn't stop to speak with reporters. He walked out in silence, Neera at his side, just like always. In the days that followed, he declined interviews, talk show appearances, book deals. He chose anonymity. He chose peace. He moved to a small town upstate, bought a house with a front porch, a wide backyard, and a simple wooden fence. And there, he started something new, a training center for retired police dogs. Dogs who, like Neera, had given everything, only to be forgotten once the badge came off. On the very first day, 7 dogs arrived at the facility. Some were restless, others shut down. Neera greeted them with quiet understanding, as if she recognized the weight each one carried. Watching her, John smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. He sat on a wooden chair, switched on a dim porch light, and watched the sun sink behind the hills. He didn't need anything else. Freedom wasn't just about walking out of a cell. It was being able to look at the companion who never left his side and know that, against all odds, she had brought him back. And you? Have you ever seen a bond so strong it could change the course of an entire life? Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and if this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in the power of loyalty. And of course, don't forget to check out the next video waiting for you on screen. There are more stories just like this one, ready to be discovered.